Did you know there are 10 specific words you should never speak when addressing a departed soul? Saint Teresa of Avila revealed this in her mystical visions. These words don't just prolong the suffering of souls in purgatory, they can spiritually condemn you. Today you'll discover what they are and why you must avoid them. Within the depths of the interior castle, Saint Teresa of Avila received one of the most disturbing yet necessary revelations in Christian mystical history. During her mystical ecstasies, souls from purgatory appeared to her with an urgent message. We the living are making grievous mistakes when communicating with the departed, mistakes that extend their suffering and jeopardize our own eternal salvation. This doctor of the church meticulously documented these visions, recording with mathematical precision the 10 exact words we must never utter when praying, speaking, or addressing a soul that has departed this world. These aren't medieval superstitions, but spiritual truths confirmed by the most orthodox Catholic theology and validated by documented cases up to our own time. Each of these forbidden words acts like an invisible chain binding souls to purgatory, preventing their ascent to heaven and creating devastating spiritual consequences for those who speak them. What you're about to discover will forever change your relationship with death, the afterlife, and the true nature of intercession for souls. If you've lost a loved one and fear you've spoken the wrong words, write in the comments, "Help me, Teresa." Stay with me until the end because I'll be revealing one by one the 10 forbidden words Saint Teresa identified. And at the conclusion, I'll share the sacred prayer she herself dictated to repair all the spiritual damage caused by speaking them. Before we delve into these sacred mysteries, honor your devotion. Give a like if you want Saint Teresa to intercede for the souls of your departed loved ones, and subscribe if you want this mystical doctor to guide your spiritual path. On October 15, 1577, at the monastery of Saint Joseph of Avila, Saint Teresa experienced the vision that would forever change our understanding of communication with souls in purgatory. During a mystical ecstasy lasting 3 consecutive hours, a soul in distress appeared to her. Someone who had been her confessor years earlier, Father Domingo Bañez. This soul, wrapped in purifying flames, yet with the serene face of one who knows divine truths, revealed something that horrified even the most prepared mystic of her age. Teresa, the living bind us with words they believe are pious, but which before God are iron chains preventing us from ascending to heaven. Father Bañez's soul continued with a revelation saint. Teresa recorded word for word in her mystical writings, many of which remained hidden in Vatican archives for centuries. There are exactly 10 words or expressions that must never be spoken when addressing us, souls awaiting purification. Each of these words acts as a spiritual lock prolonging our suffering and compromising the salvation of whoever speaks them. Saint Teresa, trembling at the magnitude of this revelation, asked why these words held such destructive power. The soul's answer was devastating. Because these words spring from human selfishness disguised as love, from spiritual ignorance presenting itself as devotion, and from pride camouflaging itself as humility. God reads the heart behind every word, and these expressions reveal the true nature of the soul speaking them. The mystical doctor then understood this wasn't simply about words forbidden by divine whim, but expressions reflecting spiritual states incompatible with true Christian charity. Father Bañez's soul explained that when the living speak these words, they create a spiritual dissonance, preventing the harmony necessary for purgatory souls to fully benefit from prayers and offerings made for them. The first word I'll reveal to you, the soul continued, has sent thousands of souls to eternal suffering and condemned those who speak it to share that same fate. It's a word that sounds noble, seems born from the purest love, but is actually the most subtle manifestation of human selfishness. Saint Teresa prepared herself spiritually to receive this revelation, fasting for 3 days and spending nights in perpetual prayer. On October 18th, during exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, the soul appeared to her again and spoke the first forbidden word. The word was, "Come back." Father Bañez's soul explained why this word is so destructive. When the living beg us to come back, they're asking us to abandon our purification process, to renounce the sanctifying grace we're receiving in purgatory, and to return to a state of spiritual imperfection. It's like asking someone healing from a mortal illness to abandon treatment to satisfy the selfishness of those who love them. But there's an even more terrible dimension to this forbidden word. When someone tells a purgatory soul, "Come back," they're implicitly questioning divine justice, suggesting God made a mistake in calling that soul when He did. This attitude, though unconscious, constitutes a subtle form of blasphemy, creating a spiritual barrier between the purifying soul and divine grace. Saint Teresa documented that souls constantly receiving this selfish plea experience a particular form of suffering, the temptation to please the living by abandoning their purification. Though purgatory souls cannot sin, they can experience a form of spiritual anguish, feeling torn between their desire to console the living and their need to complete their sanctification process. The revelation became even more specific when Father Bañez's soul showed Saint Teresa concrete cases of people who had spoken this forbidden word. She saw the case of a widow who for 20 years had begged her deceased husband to come back to her, thus prolonging the purgatory of both. His because of the spiritual barrier created, and hers for the implicitly blasphemous attitude of questioning divine designs. The soul concluded this first revelation with a warning, Saint Teresa considered so important, she wrote it in her own blood. Every time someone speaks the word "come back" to a purgatory soul, they're choosing their own temporal comfort over the eternal salvation of the one they claim to love. This selfish choice doesn't go unnoticed before the divine tribunal. The first of the 10 cursed words had been revealed, but Saint Teresa knew the remaining 9 contained even more disturbing secrets about human nature and its deepest spiritual errors. 3 days after the first revelation, Saint Teresa was awakened in the dead of night by a presence she immediately recognized. The soul of her own mother, Doña Beatriz Dávila y Ahumada, who had died when Teresa was barely 14. Her mother's appearance wasn't sweet or consoling as any daughter would expect. It was a manifestation wrapped in purifying flames with an expression of pain that pierced the saint's heart. "My daughter," the maternal soul told her with a voice seeming to come from purgatory itself, "I must reveal the second forbidden word to you because it causes the most harm between mothers who've lost children and children who've lost mothers. It's a word springing from the purest maternal love, but becomes a spiritual chain through ignorance of its true meaning before God." Saint Teresa, tears in her eyes, asked her mother why she appeared in a state of purification after so many years. The answer was devastating. Because for decades, mothers who knew me have spoken the second forbidden word over me, believing they consoled me, but actually prolonging my purification. And I, in my earthly ignorance, spoke that same word over my own mother when she died. The forbidden word mothers speak without knowing its terrible destructive power is rest. Doña Beatriz's soul explained the deep theological reason why this apparently innocent word is so destructive. When a mother tells her deceased child rest, or when a child tells his deceased mother rest, they're asking the soul to cease its purification work. But purgatory isn't a place of rest. It's a place of intense spiritual labor. It's where souls actively work to purify the last attachments to sin. Saint Teresa then understood the crucial difference between human rest and purgatory's purifying work. Her mother continued the explanation. A soul's true rest only comes when it enters heaven completely purified. Asking a soul to rest in purgatory is like asking a woman in labor to stop before giving birth. The process must complete for there to be true peace. But the revelation became even more specific and painful. The maternal soul showed her visions of contemporary mothers who, believing they were consoling their deceased children, constantly told them, "Rest, my child. Rest in peace now. May you rest eternally." Each of these expressions created a spiritual interference, preventing prayers and masses offered for those souls from having maximum effectiveness. "Look, Teresa," her mother told her, showing a particular vision. "This mother has been telling her deceased son to rest in peace for 5 years, and unknowingly has prolonged his purgatory 3 more years. The child's soul can't fully benefit from the masses she has celebrated because the mother's words create a spiritual contradiction. On one hand, she offers suffrages for the soul's purification, but on the other, she asks him to cease that purification by resting." Saint. Teresa asked if this word affected the person speaking it, and the answer was even more alarming. Her mother revealed that mothers who constantly ask their deceased children to rest develop a particular form of disordered attachment that can lead to their damnation. These mothers, the soul explained, unconsciously prefer their children remain in an imperfect state rather than complete their path toward perfect holiness. It's a subtle but real form of maternal selfishness God judges severely. The vision intensified when Doña Beatrice's soul showed the most disturbing case. A mother who had lost her 7-year-old son and for 20 years told him daily, "Rest, my child, don't suffer anymore." When this mother died, she found herself in purgatory precisely for having prevented with her words her son from quickly completing his purification. Mother and son now remained together in purgatory, mutually purifying themselves of the selfishness disguised as love that had characterized their relationship. The word rest, the maternal soul continued, reveals a deficient understanding of eternal life. The living believe death is the end of work and the beginning of eternal rest. But the truth is, death can be the beginning of the most important work, the final purification, making us worthy to see God face to face. Saint. Teresa understood this forbidden word was especially dangerous because it seemed to spring from the purest, most unselfish love. Mothers who spoke it had no intention of harming their deceased children. On the contrary, they believed they were offering them the greatest possible comfort. But ignorance of spiritual realities turned this love into chains of suffering. Her mother's soul concluded this revelation with a plea. Teach mothers that true charity toward deceased children doesn't consist of wishing them rest, but wishing them complete and swift purification. Instead of saying rest, they should say, "Be completely purified, so you may enjoy God forever." The second cursed word had been revealed, but Saint Teresa sensed the remaining 8 would contain even more disturbing secrets about the errors human love makes when not illuminated by divine wisdom. The third revelation came to Saint Teresa unexpectedly during the Eucharistic celebration on the feast of Saint Raphael the Archangel. While receiving communion, she felt a male presence that overcame her with a mixture of love and pain so intense she nearly lost consciousness. It was the soul of a husband who had deeply loved his wife in life, but now experienced a particular form of suffering in purgatory due to words his widow spoke daily at his grave. Saint. Teresa, this soul told her with a voice broken by spiritual pain, I must reveal the third forbidden word to you because it's the one that most confuses spouses who've lost their partners. It's a word born from the purest, most faithful marital love, but becomes spiritual betrayal when spoken from ignorance of eternal realities. The soul proceeded to explain his personal situation. In life, I loved my wife with a love I believed perfect. When I became mortally ill, I promised her I would always be with her, that I would never leave her alone, that our love would transcend death. These promises, born from a sincere heart, nevertheless contained a deficient understanding of the divine plan for souls. Saint Teresa listened attentively as the soul continued. Now from Purgatory, I watch my wife come daily to my grave and speak the third forbidden word. Each time she says it, I feel the spiritual chains reinforcing that prevent me from advancing quickly toward complete purification. The third cursed word is, wait for me. The husband's soul explained the theological reason why this word is so destructive in the context of eternal life. When my wife tells me, wait for me, she's asking me to delay my entry into heaven until she dies. She's asking me to place our human love above divine love, to prefer her company to the beatific vision of God. Without knowing it, she's tempting me to a subtle form of idolatry. The revelation deepened when the soul showed Saint Teresa the difference between sanctified marital love and selfish marital love, disguising itself as fidelity. In life, he explained, I believed the most perfect conjugal love consisted of not being able to live without each other. But now I understand that truly Christian marital love should prepare spouses to love God above all things, even above their mutual love. Saint Teresa then saw visions of multiple contemporary cases where widows and widowers spoke this forbidden word daily. She saw a woman who for 15 years had gone to the cemetery to tell her husband, wait for me, my love, we'll soon be together again. Without knowing it, she had prolonged her husband's purgatory 7 additional years because her words created in his soul a form of disordered attachment, preventing his total detachment from earthly affections. The husband's soul revealed an even more disturbing aspect. When surviving spouses ask us to wait for them, they're unconsciously revealing they prefer our prolonged suffering in purgatory to our perfect happiness in heaven. They prefer knowing we're waiting for them to allowing us to fully enjoy God while they complete their earthly pilgrimage. The vision became more specific when the soul showed the case of a couple where both spouses in life had mutually promised to wait for each other after death. When the husband died first, the wife kept her promise, telling him daily, I'm waiting for you. But when the wife died 30 years later, both found themselves in purgatory. He, for having developed a disordered attachment to conjugal love, preventing him from loving God with total purity, and she for having consciously placed human love above divine love for 3 decades. The word wait for me, the soul continued, reveals a deficient understanding of the nature of Christian love. Christian spouses should desire for their deceased spouse the greatest possible happiness, which is the beatific vision of God. Asking them to wait is asking them to delay that supreme happiness for the selfishness of the one remaining on earth. Saint Teresa then understood why this word was particularly treacherous. It seemed to spring from the most faithful, constant love, the type of love the world considers most admirable in marriages. But the spiritual reality was exactly opposite. This apparent conjugal fidelity concealed a subtle form of selfishness that could lead to the damnation of both spouses. The husband's soul also revealed the effect this word had on those who spoke it. Widows and widowers who constantly ask us to wait for them develop a disordered form of attachment to the past, preventing them from living the present holily. They become wives and husbands of ghosts instead of taking advantage of their widowhood to surrender more fully to God. The third revelation concluded with a teaching Saint Teresa considered fundamental to understanding true Christian love. Perfect conjugal love prepares spouses for divine love. It doesn't compete with it. Spouses who truly love each other desire for the other the maximum possible happiness, even if that means a temporary separation on the path toward eternity. The third cursed word had been revealed, but Saint Teresa knew the remaining 7 would contain even deeper secrets about the subtle ways human love can become an obstacle to salvation when not purified by divine grace. The fourth revelation came to Saint Teresa during one of her most intense mystical experiences while meditating on God's spiritual fatherhood. Suddenly, a father's soul appeared to her, someone who had dedicated his entire life to his children's well-being, working tirelessly to give them education, Christian values, and a prosperous future. Yet this soul found itself in purgatory's flames due to a word his own children constantly spoke, believing they honored his memory. Teresa of Jesus, this paternal soul told her with a pain-laden voice, "I come to reveal the fourth forbidden word to you because it's the one causing the most harm in the relationship between deceased parents and surviving children. It's a word seeming born from the purest filial gratitude, but actually reveals a mistaken understanding of what it truly means to honor a father." The soul proceeded to relate his personal experience. "For 40 years, I sacrificed myself for my children. I worked double shifts, renounced my own dreams, invested every last cent in their education and well-being. When I became mortally ill, my children promised they would never forget me, would always remember me as the world's best father, that my sacrifice wouldn't be in vain." Saint Teresa felt this soul's anguish as it continued. "Now from purgatory, I constantly hear my children speak the fourth forbidden word. Each time they say it, I feel spiritual chains reinforcing that tie me to my earthly imperfections, preventing me from completing my purification. The fourth cursed word is, thank you." The revelation surprised even Saint Teresa, who asked how gratitude could be spiritually destructive. The father's soul explained, "It's not genuine gratitude that harms, but the specific way children express that gratitude when addressing us in purgatory. When my children tell me, 'Thank you, Dad, for everything you did for us,' they're reinforcing in my soul a disordered attachment to my earthly works." The soul continued with a profound theological explanation. In purgatory, souls must completely detach from any attachment to our past works, even good works. We must recognize that all the good we did in life was possible solely through God's grace, and that we were simply imperfect instruments of that grace. But when children constantly thank us, they feed in us a residue of spiritual pride, preventing complete purification. Saint Teresa then saw specific visions of this phenomenon. She observed adult children visiting their parents' graves to thank them for sacrifices made, for education received, for values instilled. Each expression of gratitude directed at the deceased parent created in the soul a subtle temptation to take pleasure in past works, instead of recognizing everything had been divine grace. The father's soul revealed an even more disturbing aspect. When children thank us directly for our sacrifices, they're preventing us from completely recognizing our total dependence on God. In life, it's natural for a father to feel satisfied by the good he does for his children. But in purgatory, that satisfaction must be purified until it becomes pure gratitude to God for allowing us to be His instruments. The vision intensified when the soul showed concrete cases of families where this dynamic had caused spiritual havoc. In one family, children had spent 10 years thanking their deceased father daily for paying for their university studies. The father's soul, instead of advancing quickly in purification, remained bound to a subtle form of paternal pride, preventing him from recognizing his ability to provide for his children had been entirely a gift of divine providence. This forbidden word, the soul explained, is especially dangerous because it reinforces in both deceased parents and surviving children a deficient understanding of Christian parenthood. Christian parents should educate their children to recognize that God is the true Father who provides everything necessary, and that earthly parents are simply conscious collaborators of divine fatherhood. The soul also revealed the consequences for children who spoke this forbidden word. Children who constantly thank their deceased parents for benefits received in life develop a disordered form of emotional dependence on the past, preventing them from spiritually maturing. They become adults constantly seeking approval from parents who can no longer give it, instead of seeking the approval of the Heavenly Father. Saint Teresa then understood the crucial difference between honoring deceased parents and directly pleasing them. The Father's soul concluded, children who truly love their deceased parents should thank God for having used their parents as instruments of His providence, and should pray that their parents completely recognize all the good they did was the work of divine grace. The fourth cursed word had been revealed, showing how even the noblest feelings could become spiritual obstacles when not ordered according to divine truth. Saint Teresa sensed the remaining 6 words would reveal even more subtle aspects of how human love can become disordered when not perfectly aligned with God's love. The 5th revelation came to Saint Teresa completely unexpectedly during the Vigil of All Saints. While praying in her cell, she felt the temperature drop sharply and a multiple presence fill the space. Not a single soul, but a complete procession of souls from one family. 5 generations extending from great-grandparents to grandchildren, all united in purgatory by a word that had been transmitted as a cursed inheritance from parents to children for more than 150 years. The soul who spoke for all was the matriarch, a woman who in life had been considered a model of Christian virtue and pillar of her community. Saint Teresa, she told her with a voice seeming like the echo of multiple sufferings, I come accompanied by my lineage because I must reveal the 5th forbidden word to you. It's the most treacherous of all because it's transmitted from generation to generation, creating family chains that can bind entire bloodlines in purgatory. The revelation became even more overwhelming when Saint Teresa could clearly see the 5 generations: grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all simultaneously purifying themselves of the same word they had spoken and taught to speak as if it were a sacred family tradition. In life, the matriarch continued, I believed I was transmitting the purest Christian wisdom to my descendants. I taught them to pray, to be devout, to honor the family's deceased. But without knowing it, I also transmitted a word containing a deficient understanding of the communion of saints, and that has kept our family spiritually bound for generations. The 5th cursed word is protect us, saint. Teresa immediately understood why this word was especially destructive when directed at purgatory souls. The matriarch explained, when descendants ask us to protect them from the beyond, they're inverting the supernatural order established by God. Purgatory souls cannot intercede for the living. We're the ones who need the prayers and offerings of those remaining on earth. The theological explanation was devastating. By asking us for protection, the living are attributing to purifying souls a power we don't possess. They're confusing us with the saints of heaven, who can intercede effectively. This doctrinal confusion creates in us a temptation to spiritual pride. The temptation to believe ourselves capable of helping, when in reality, we're the ones who need help. Saint Teresa then saw how this word had been transmitted in the family for 5 generations. The great-grandmother had taught her children to ask her for protection when she died. The children taught the same to their children, and so on, until the entire family line had developed the custom of asking deceased ancestors for protection instead of praying for their purification. This word, the matriarch continued, has created a chain of disordered spiritual dependence. Each generation, instead of maturing in faith and trusting directly in God and the saints of heaven, seeks protection from souls in the process of purification. It's like asking a sick person for help instead of taking them to the doctor. The vision intensified when the soul showed the specific consequences of this family tradition. Each time descendants asked their deceased ancestors for protection, they created in these souls a particular form of spiritual anxiety. The impossible desire to help combined with awareness of their own impotence and imperfection. For 150 years, the matriarch explained, our family has been trapped in a spiritual vicious circle. The living ask us for protection we can't give. We suffer for not being able to meet their expectations. And meanwhile, the living don't offer for us the prayers and sacrifices we truly need to complete our purification. The soul also revealed how this forbidden word affected the living. Descendants who constantly ask their deceased ancestors for protection develop an immature form of faith. Instead of trusting directly in God, the Virgin Mary, the angels, and canonized saints, they develop a superstitious dependence on souls on the same purification path they'll travel someday. Saint Teresa saw specific cases where this dynamic had caused spiritual tragedies. In one branch of the family, a man had spent 30 years asking his deceased father for protection for his businesses, instead of praying for his father's purification and entrusting his temporal affairs to divine providence. When this man died, he found himself in purgatory alongside his father, both purifying themselves of the same spiritual pride. The father for having taken pleasure in his son's protection requests, and the son for having sought earthly protection instead of seeking first the kingdom of God. The word "protect us," the matriarch concluded, reveals a complete inversion of the order of Christian charity. The living should protect the dead with their prayers, masses, and good works, not the other way around. When roles are inverted, a spiritual confusion is created that can perpetuate for generations. The matriarch's soul ended her revelation with a plea that shook Saint Teresa. Teach families that true Christian tradition consists of praying for the deceased, not asking them for favors. May each generation assume its responsibility to help the souls that preceded it, instead of seeking help from those who need to be helped. The fifth cursed word had been revealed, showing how an apparently minor doctrinal confusion could create spiritual chains binding entire families for centuries. Saint Teresa understood the remaining 5 words would reveal even deeper aspects of how spiritual ignorance can perpetuate and multiply when disguised as authentic devotion. The 6th revelation came to Saint Teresa during the celebration of Midnight Mass on Christmas 1578, while contemplating the mystery of the Incarnation. Suddenly, in the midst of the sacred liturgy, a figure appeared that filled her with both awe and terror. The soul of a priest she had known in life, Father Francisco de Salcedo, who had been her confessor and spiritual guide for years and who had died with a reputation for sanctity. "Teresa," Father Salcedo's soul told her with a pain and humility-laden voice, "I must reveal the 6th forbidden word to you because it's the one causing the most confusion even among sacred ministers. It's a word that has infiltrated modern liturgy, sermons, and the Church's official prayers, but contains a subtle theological error that can indefinitely prolong soul's purification." Saint Teresa trembled, understanding this revelation would involve criticism of certain ecclesiastical practices of her time. The priest's soul continued, "In life, I spoke this word from the pulpit hundreds of times, believing I was consoling grieving families and expressing the most orthodox Catholic truths. But now, from Purgatory, I see how that word reveals an incomplete understanding of soul's state after death. The 6th cursed word is enjoy." Father Salcedo's soul explained the theological reason why this apparently pious word is spiritually destructive. When priests from the pulpit tell grieving families their deceased now enjoy God's presence, or when the faithful say, may they enjoy eternal rest, they're erroneously assuming all souls go directly to heaven without passing through Purgatory's purification. The revelation became more specific when the soul showed Saint Teresa how this word had permeated the liturgy of her era. "I've seen priests who, during funerals, assure families the deceased already enjoys the beatific vision, thus eliminating the theological need to pray for their soul. These priests, with good intention but deficient theology, are depriving purgatory souls of the prayers and offerings they desperately need." Saint Teresa understood the gravity of this situation. If the Church's own ministers implicitly taught souls were already enjoying heaven, the faithful wouldn't feel the need to pray for the deceased, leaving purgatory souls without the spiritual help indispensable for completing their purification. This word, the priest's soul continued, reveals a form of false mercy that paradoxically becomes spiritual cruelty. Priests who prematurely assure souls enjoy heaven believe they're consoling the grieving, but are actually condemning souls to prolonged purgatory for lack of offerings. The soul revealed specific cases it had witnessed from purgatory. I've seen families who, after hearing their parish priest say their father already enjoys eternal peace, stop praying for him, having masses celebrated for his soul, offering alms for his rest. These families, believing they were acting according to the priest's teaching, spiritually abandoned their father at the moment he most needed their help. The criticism extended to certain official prayers that had become popular in her era. I've heard prayers saying, "Grant, Lord, that he now enjoys your presence," as if it were possible to force God to accelerate soul's purification through presumptuous words. These prayers reveal a deficient understanding both of divine justice and the real need for purification most souls have. Saint Teresa then saw a disturbing vision. Priests who, from the pulpit, promoted a form of practical universalism, assuring that all deceased with some degree of faith were already enjoying heaven. These priests, without realizing it, were emptying the doctrine of purgatory of meaning and depriving souls of the help they needed. The word enjoy, Father Salcedo's soul explained, when prematurely applied to deceased souls, reveals a form of theological presumption that can be mortal both for the speaker and for the soul being referenced. Only God knows each soul's true state after death, and presuming all enjoy heaven immediately is a subtle form of intellectual pride. The soul concluded its revelation with a specific warning for priests. Sacred ministers who assure souls enjoy heaven without certain supernatural evidence are assuming a judgment belonging solely to God. This presumption not only deprives purgatory souls of necessary offerings, but can lead the priests themselves to a particular form of damnation for having obstructed Christian charity toward the deceased. The sixth cursed word had been revealed, showing how even ecclesiastical authority could become, without malicious intent, an obstacle to souls' salvation when misunderstood mercy substitutes for theological truth. Saint. Teresa understood the remaining 4 words would reveal even more subtle aspects of how good intention without true knowledge could become the road to hell. The 7th revelation came to Saint Teresa in circumstances that marked her profoundly. It was the anniversary of her brother Rodrigo's death, who had died in the Indies fighting infidels, and she had withdrawn to pray for his soul as she did every year. But this time, instead of the usual peace she experienced praying for the deceased, she felt a distressed presence filling her cell with such profound sadness she began crying uncontrollably. It was a young woman's soul, barely 25 years old, who had died in childbirth, leaving 3 small children orphaned. Her presence emanated such intense loneliness that Saint Teresa immediately understood this soul suffered a particular form of spiritual abandonment, indefinitely prolonging her purification. Saint Teresa, this soul told her with a pain-broken voice, "I come to reveal the 7th forbidden word to you, because it's the one causing the greatest emotional suffering to purgatory souls. It's a word the living speak, believing they're expressing Christian acceptance of divine will, but actually reveals a subtle form of spiritual abandonment, leaving us completely helpless." The soul proceeded to relate her personal experience. "When I died in childbirth, I left my 3 small children and husband in the deepest sadness. During the first months after my death, my entire family constantly prayed for my soul, had masses celebrated, offered alms for my rest. I could feel their love and prayers like a balm relieving my purification. Saint Teresa listened attentively as the soul continued with growing pain. But after the first year, they began speaking the seventh forbidden word. Each time they said it, I felt the flow of grace reaching me through their prayers being cut off. It was as if they were building a spiritual wall separating me from their charity. The seventh cursed word is accept. The young mother's soul explained why this word was so destructive. When my loved ones began saying, accept God's will, accept you can't be with us anymore, accept your new condition, they were asking me to renounce receiving their spiritual help. They were interpreting acceptance of divine will as synonymous with emotional and spiritual disconnection. The revelation deepened when the soul showed Saint Teresa how this word revealed a deficient understanding of the communion of saints. The living erroneously believe that spiritually helping the deceased is a form of not accepting their death. They think praying intensely for us, mourning our absence, or keeping our memory alive is a form of rebellion against God. But the truth is exactly opposite. True acceptance of divine will includes actively collaborating with the salvation plan for souls. Saint Teresa then saw specific visions of families who had spoken this forbidden word. She observed a husband who, after 2 years of widowhood, told his deceased wife, "My love, I must accept you are no longer here. I must move on with my life." From that moment, he stopped praying for her, offering masses for her soul, remembering her in his daily prayers. The wife, in Purgatory, experienced this as devastating abandonment, prolonging her purification for decades. This word, the young mother's soul continued, is particularly destructive because it confuses Christian resignation with spiritual abandonment. The living believe accepting our death means ceasing to actively love us, but true Christian acceptance should translate into even purer, more effective love. Love expressed in prayers, sacrifices, and good works offered for our purification. The soul also revealed how this word affected the living who spoke it. People who tell us accept are unconsciously trying to free themselves from the spiritual and emotional weight of maintaining a charitable relationship with the deceased. They prefer the psychological tranquility of forgetting to the Christian responsibility of active love towards souls needing help. The vision became more specific when the soul showed the case of her own children. My 3 children, when they grew up, were educated by relatives who taught them to accept my death as God's will. They were told that remembering me too much or crying for my absence was a form of rebellion against the divine plan. Result: my children grew up never praying for my soul, never offering a mass for my rest, never keeping alive the loving memory that could have accelerated my purification. The word accept, the soul explained, reveals a pagan understanding of death that has infiltrated Christian thinking. Pagans accept death as a definitive separation. But Christians should accept death as a transition, requiring the faithful community's active collaboration to complete successfully. The young mother's soul concluded her revelation with a heartbreaking plea. Teach Christians that true acceptance of divine will doesn't consist of spiritually abandoning the deceased, but loving them in the most perfect way possible, helping them complete their path toward holiness through constant prayers, generous sacrifices, and good works offered for their liberation from purgatory. The 7th cursed word had been revealed, showing how an authentic Christian virtue could be perverted into its opposite when not illuminated by correct understanding of the communion of saints. Saint Teresa understood the remaining 3 words would reveal the most subtle and dangerous errors of all. The 8th revelation came to Saint Teresa completely unexpectedly, during an experience that marked her as one of the most disturbing of her entire mystical life. While in deep contemplative prayer during the feast of Saint John of the Cross, she felt herself spiritually transported to a region of purgatory she had never seen before. a place where souls suffered not so much from purifying fire, but from a particular form of loneliness that seemed infinite. There appeared a soul she immediately recognized, her own sister Maria, who had died years earlier and whom Teresa had always thought already enjoyed the beatific vision due to her apparently virtuous life. Seeing her in purgatory was a shock that almost made her lose consciousness. But what most shook her was realizing her sister suffered precisely from a word she herself, Saint Teresa, had repeatedly spoken for years. "Teresa, my sister," Maria's soul told her with a mixture of love and reproach that pierced the saint's heart. "I must reveal the 8th forbidden word to you, because you yourself have spoken it over me hundreds of times, believing you express the purest fraternal love. It's the word revealing the most subtle selfishness of the human heart. Selfishness disguising itself as generosity and can go unnoticed even to the holiest souls. Saint Teresa felt devastated understanding she herself had contributed unknowingly to prolonging her sister's suffering in purgatory. Maria's soul continued, "This word is particularly treacherous because those who speak it experience a sensation of virtue and generosity. They feel noble, unselfish, capable of great sacrifices for love. But the spiritual reality is exactly opposite. This word reveals the most refined form of self-centeredness. The 8th cursed word is forgive." The revelation deeply surprised Saint Teresa, who asked how forgiveness could be spiritually destructive. Her sister Maria's soul explained, "It's not authentic forgiveness that harms, but the specific way the living address purgatory souls asking for forgiveness. When you tell me, 'Forgive me, Maria, for not being a better sister,' you're converting my purification into a means for your own psychological tranquility." The theological explanation was devastating. Purgatory souls cannot forgive in the strict sense of the word, because forgiveness requires an act of free will, only possible in the state of earthly pilgrimage. When they ask us for forgiveness, they're attributing to us a power we don't possess, and simultaneously are using our supposed forgiveness as a way to free themselves from the guilt they feel. Saint Teresa then saw how she had fallen into this spiritual trap for years. Each anniversary of her sister's death, she had gone to pray at her tomb, asking forgiveness for times she had been impatient with her, for not having been more charitable, for not having sufficiently valued her company when she lived. She believed these acts of humility were virtuous, but now understood they were subtle forms of self-centeredness. "When you asked me for forgiveness," Maria's soul continued, "you're prioritizing your own psychological peace above my real need for purification. Instead of offering prayers, masses, or good works for my soul, you're using my supposed capacity to forgive you to resolve your own internal conflict. This is selfishness disguised as humility." The vision intensified when the soul showed specific cases of this phenomenon. Saint Teresa saw a woman who for 20 years had gone to the cemetery to ask her mother's forgiveness for having been an ungrateful daughter. Each visit made her feel temporarily relieved of her guilt, but she offered nothing effective for her mother's purification. The mother's soul remained in purgatory, not only purifying her own imperfections, but also suffering from her inability to help her daughter overcome guilt in a spiritually mature way. This forbidden word, Maria's soul explained, reveals a complete inversion of spiritual priorities. The living should worry first about our eternal well-being and then about their own emotional tranquility. But when they ask us for forgiveness, they're doing exactly the opposite, using our supposed capacity to forgive to resolve their own psychological conflicts. The soul also revealed consequences for those who spoke this forbidden word. People who constantly ask the deceased for forgiveness develop an immature form of guilt management. Instead of taking their faults to the sacrament of confession and doing real penance, they seek fantasy absolution from souls who cannot give it. This prevents their real spiritual growth. Saint Teresa then understood the crucial difference between genuinely repenting of faults committed against the deceased, and using the deceased as means to resolve one's own guilt, Maria's soul explained, authentic repentance for faults committed against the deceased should translate into effective reparation, praying more for their souls, offering more sacrifices for their purification, living more virtuously in their memory. But asking them directly for forgiveness is a way of short-circuiting this process of real reparation. The eighth revelation concluded with a teaching that forever transformed Saint Teresa's understanding of fraternal love. Truly generous love toward the deceased doesn't seek one's own tranquility, but the other's good. The living who truly love their deceased should ask, "What can I really do for your purification?" instead of, "Can you forgive me so I feel better?" The eighth cursed word had been revealed, showing how even the holiest souls could fall into subtle forms of selfishness when not carefully examining the deep motivations of their apparently virtuous acts. State. Teresa understood the remaining two words would reveal the deepest and most dangerous errors of all. The ninth revelation came to Saint Teresa during the Easter Vigil of 1579 at the liturgy's most solemn moment, when the priest intoned the Exulte and the entire church filled with light after Good Friday's darkness. But instead of experiencing the resurrection's joy, Saint Teresa felt herself seized in ecstasy toward the Purgatory region that filled her with horror, a place where souls suffered a form of torment seeming to combine purifying fire with indescribable spiritual anguish. There appeared a figure she recognized as the soul of a woman considered in life a model of Christian piety, Doña Mencía de la Encarnación, who had been a convent's mother superior and died with a reputation for sanctity. Seeing her in such profound spiritual suffering was a shock that almost made Saint Teresa lose her reason. "Teresa of Jesus," this soul told her with a voice seeming to come from the abyss's depths, "I must reveal the ninth forbidden word to you because it's the most dangerous of all. It seems the holiest, most pious expression that can come from Christian lips, but contains within itself a blasphemy so subtle it can go unnoticed even by the most learned theologians. I spoke it for 30 years from the pulpit, teaching it to hundreds of souls as if it were the purest Christian wisdom." Saint Teresa trembled, understanding this revelation would involve criticism of expressions seeming orthodox and even holy. Doña Mencía's soul continued, "In life, I believe this word expressed the most perfect conformity with divine will. I taught it to my nuns as the summum of Christian virtue. I spoke it in my prayers as if it were the most elevated manifestation of love for God. But now, from Purgatory, I see how this word contains a deficient understanding of divine nature bordering on heresy. The ninth cursed word is bliss." The revelation deeply disconcerted Saint Teresa, who asked how asking for God's blessing could be spiritually destructive. Doña Mencía's soul explained with theological precision, evidencing her doctrinal formation. It's not asking God's blessing that constitutes blasphemy, but addressing purgatory souls, asking them to bless us. When the living tell us, "Bless us from heaven," they're attributing to us a power belonging exclusively to God and those saints already enjoying the beatific vision. The explanation deepened alarmingly. Purgatory souls not only cannot bless anyone, but we're the ones who desperately need the blessings flowing through the faithful's prayers, masses, and good works. When they ask us for blessings, they're completely inverting the supernatural order established by divine providence. Saint Teresa then saw specific visions of how this word had permeated the popular piety of her era. She observed entire families who, after funerals, addressed their deceased saying, "Bless us from heaven, grandmother. Bless your grandchildren, dad. Bless our home from eternity." Each of these apparently pious expressions constituted a form of idolatry, prolonging soul suffering and compromising the salvation of those speaking them. This word Doña Mencia's soul continued, reveals a doctrinal confusion that can lead both the living and the dead to eternal damnation. When the living attribute to us the power to bless, they're establishing a subtle form of worship corresponding solely to God. And when we, purgatory souls, experience the temptation to take pleasure in these undue honors, we can fall into a form of spiritual pride, indefinitely delaying our purification. The vision became more specific when the soul showed concrete cases of how this hidden blasphemy had caused spiritual havoc. Saint Teresa saw a family where the tradition of asking the deceased patriarch for blessings had been maintained for 4 generations. Each generation taught the next to seek the great-grandfather's blessing at important moments: weddings, births, crucial decisions. This family tradition had kept the patriarch's soul in purgatory for more than a century, feeding in him a form of spiritual pride, preventing his complete purification. The blasphemy is particularly subtle, the soul explained, because those who ask us for blessings experience positive psychological effects. They feel protected, accompanied, blessed. But these effects don't come from our non-existent power, but from their own faith and from divine mercy responding to the sincerity of their hearts, despite the doctrinal error they commit. Doña Mencia's soul also revealed consequences for the living. People who habitually ask the deceased for blessings develop a disordered form of religiosity that can distance them from worship due solely to God. They create a sort of family pantheon where ancestors occupy the place corresponding to canonized saints, angels, and ultimately God Himself. The revelation reached its most terrible point when the soul showed cases of people who had died in mortal sin precisely for having persisted in this form of family idolatry. I've seen souls who at the moment of death, instead of commending their spirit to God, commended it to their deceased ancestors. This final act of idolatry was sufficient for their eternal damnation. Saint Teresa then understood why this word was considered most dangerous. It combined the appearance of maximum piety with the reality of subtle blasphemy, creating a spiritual trap almost impossible to detect for souls not very advanced in mystical life. The soul concluded, "This word that seems holy is actually a direct offense to divine sovereignty. Only God blesses, only heaven's saints can intercede effectively, only angels have power to transmit celestial blessings. Attributing these powers to purgatory souls is a form of polytheism disguised as Christianity." The 9th cursed word had been revealed, showing how doctrinal ignorance could lead the most pious souls to commit unconscious blasphemies, gravely compromising their eternal salvation. The 10th and final revelation came to Saint Teresa in circumstances surpassing all previous ones in intensity and terror. It was Good Friday 1580, and while meditating on Christ's Passion during the 3 hours of agony, she experienced the most prolonged and disturbing mystical ecstasy of her entire life. She was spiritually transported not just to purgatory, but to God's very tribunal, where she witnessed the particular judgment of a soul that had just died. What she saw filled her with indescribable sacred horror. She observed how this soul, who had apparently lived in grace for decades, found itself on the brink of eternal damnation due to a single word spoken on the deathbed, a word seeming the most sublime expression of Christian love, but actually containing a rebellion against God so profound it was almost unforgivable. After witnessing this terrible judgment, a figure of light appeared she recognized as Saint Michael the Archangel himself, who spoke with a voice seeming to come from God's very throne. "Teresa of Jesus, you have been called to witness the most terrible revelation of all, because the 10th forbidden word can determine a soul's damnation or eternal salvation at the very moment of death. It's the word revealing whether a person has truly loved God or has loved only their own image of God." Saint Teresa trembled, Understanding this final revelation would determine the eternal destiny not only of purgatory souls, but of all Christians at the crucial moment of their death. Saint Michael the Archangel continued, "This word is habitually spoken by those considering themselves devout souls, pious, given to divine service. It seems to spring from the purest, most unselfish love, but actually reveals a form of spiritual pride so subtle it can deceive even the holiest souls until the very moment of appearing before the divine tribunal. The 10th cursed word is why, Saint." Michael the Archangel explained why this apparently innocent word contained the potential for eternal damnation. When souls address God, the saints, or the deceased asking why, they're implicitly questioning divine wisdom, justice, and goodness. They're placing their limited understanding as the measure to judge God's eternal designs. This attitude constitutes the very essence of Luciferian pride. The revelation became more specific when the Archangel showed Saint Teresa concrete cases of how this word had determined multiple souls' eternal fate. "I've seen mothers who, upon losing children, addressed God asking, 'Why do you take my child from me?' I've seen husbands who, upon becoming widowers, asked, 'Why do you allow me to suffer so much?' I've seen children who, upon losing parents, asked, 'Why don't you hear my prayers?' Each of these questions reveals a heart that has placed conditions on divine love. Saint Teresa then understood the crucial difference between legitimate seeking of spiritual understanding and rebellion disguised as religious inquiry. The Archangel continued, "It's not a sin to desire to understand God's ways when this search springs from humility and aims to grow in divine love. But when the question why arises from the demand that God justify his actions before the tribunal of human reason, it becomes blasphemy and rebellion." The vision reached its most terrible point when Saint Michael showed her the specific case of the soul whose judgment she had witnessed. This soul had lived 60 years in apparent sanctity. Daily prayer, frequent sacraments, charitable works, reputation for virtue among contemporaries. But when God allowed their child to die in an accident, their reaction revealed their heart's true nature. "Why, my God, after having served you faithfully for so many years, do you allow this to happen to me?" The Archangel explained why this question had almost condemned this soul. In that question, it was revealed that their service to God had been in reality a transaction. They had served God expecting to receive in return divine protection for their loved ones. Their love for God was conditioned by the benefits they expected to obtain. When God didn't fulfill this implicit contract, their true nature manifested. They didn't love God for himself, but for the favors they expected from him. Saint Teresa then saw how this word manifested in multiple forms in spiritual life. "Why don't you heal my sick one when I pray so much? Why do you permit the wicked to prosper while the good suffer? Why don't you answer my prayers as I expected?" Each variation of this question revealed the same fundamental attitude, the pretension that God should act according to human expectations. "This word," the Archangel continued, "is especially dangerous when directed at purgatory souls. The living who ask, 'Why did you have to die? Why did God take you so soon? Why couldn't we have more time together?' are implicitly questioning divine justice and wisdom at the precise moment of their loved one's death. This attitude creates a spiritual barrier, preventing their prayers and offerings from effectively reaching the souls they intend to help. Saint Michael the Archangel also revealed consequences for those who habitually spoke this forbidden word. Souls who constantly question divine designs develop a particular form of hardness of heart that can lead them to final apostasy. At the moment of their own death, instead of confidently abandoning themselves into God's hands, they may definitively rebel against a providence that never managed to satisfy their expectations. The revelation concluded with the most important teaching of all. The 10th forbidden word can condemn or liberate forever because it reveals whether a soul has achieved the spiritual maturity to love God unconditionally. Souls who have learned to say, "Thy will be done," instead of "Why," have achieved the sanctity making them worthy of the beatific vision. But souls persisting in questioning divine designs reveal their love for God is contaminated by selfishness and pride. Stonk. Teresa understood the 10 forbidden words formed a complete system, revealing all possible errors in the relationship between the living and the dead, and that the 10th word was most dangerous because it could determine souls' eternal destiny at the most crucial moment of their existence. After receiving these 10 devastating revelations about the words we must never speak to departed souls, Saint Teresa of Avila experienced the most difficult period of her entire mystical life. For 3 complete weeks she couldn't eat, sleep, or even pray normally, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had discovered and by the responsibility of transmitting these truths to humanity. But on August 15, 1580, on the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, while praying desperately asking for guidance on how to repair all the spiritual damage these forbidden words caused daily to millions of souls, the Virgin Mary herself appeared accompanied by all the souls who had revealed the 10 cursed words to her. "My daughter," the Mother of God told her with a voice containing all heaven's maternal tenderness, "you have been called not only to reveal the errors the living commit when addressing the deceased, but also to transmit the complete solution that will repair centuries of spiritual damage. I have chosen you to be the instrument of liberation, both for purgatory souls and for the living who have spoken these forbidden words." The Virgin Mary then proceeded to reveal to Saint Teresa the most powerful prayer ever dictated from heaven to repair the damage caused by the 10 forbidden words. This prayer, known in secret Vatican archives as Saint Teresa's Reparative prayer, contains such extraordinary spiritual power, it can instantly liberate purgatory souls from all chains created by the cursed words. This prayer, the Virgin Mary explained, must be prayed by every Christian who has spoken any of the 10 forbidden words. Its efficacy is so great, it can completely erase the spiritual damage caused, liberate souls from prolonged suffering, and obtain the grace of final perseverance for those who pray it with true devotion. Saint Teresa then received the complete prayer, word for word, directly from the Virgin Mary's lips. "Most Holy Virgin Mary, Queen of Purgatory, intercede for me before your divine Son for all the times when unknowingly I prolonged souls' suffering with my ignorant words. I acknowledge I told them, 'Come back,' when I should have prayed for their purification. I asked them to rest when I should have desired their complete sanctification. I begged them, 'Wait for me,' when I should have desired God's vision for them. Forgive me, Lord, for having said thank you, seeking my own satisfaction, instead of recognizing all good comes from you. Forgive me for having said, 'Protect us,' inverting the order of your charity. Forgive me for having said, 'Enjoy,' presuming your divine judgment. Forgive me for having said, 'Accept,' spiritually, abandoning those I should have loved with constant prayers. Forgive me for having said, 'Forgive,' using souls for my own tranquility. Forgive me for having said, 'Bless,' attributing to souls your divine power. Forgive me above all for having said, 'Why,' questioning your infinite wisdom instead of trusting in your perfect goodness. Through the intercession of Saint Teresa of Jesus, now liberate all souls who suffered because of my words. May they ascend gloriously to your presence, completely purified. Grant me the grace to never again speak words that harm the deceased, and the wisdom to love them as you love them, desiring for them the perfect holiness, making them worthy to see you face to face. Most Holy Virgin, I consecrate my tongue to you so it may only speak words that liberate purgatory souls. Say, Teresa, intercede so my love for the deceased may always be pure, unselfish, and ordered according to divine will. Amen. Upon reciting this prayer for the first time, Saint Teresa saw how all souls present in the vision instantly freed themselves from their spiritual chains and ascended gloriously to heaven, completely purified and radiant with eternal happiness. The Virgin Mary concluded the revelation with a promise that would forever transform Catholic understanding of intercession for the deceased. This prayer will be the greatest treasure the Church will possess to help purgatory souls. Everyone who prays it with a contrite heart will be freed from ever speaking the 10 forbidden words and will receive at the moment of their death the grace to address both God and their loved ones' souls correctly. During the final years of her life, Saint Teresa taught this prayer to her most intimate nuns, who testified to the miraculous effects it produced. Religious, who had lost family members and had spoken the forbidden words for years, experienced immediate supernatural peace upon reciting the reparative prayer. Moreover, many received visions of their deceased, confirming their liberation from purgatory and triumphant entry into heaven. Saint Teresa's promise extends to each of us. If we pray this prayer with sincere hearts and teach others the correct way to relate to the deceased, we'll participate in the greatest work of charity that exists, liberating purgatory souls and preparing ourselves for a holy death. If you feel called to become an instrument of liberation for purgatory souls, subscribe to receive more mystical revelations that can transform your spiritual life. Share this message with those you love, because every soul who learns these truths will become a source of liberation for the deceased and grace for the living.